Good evening, everyone. It is such an honor and a pleasure to have you all here. My name is Dr. David Falconley, and I have the distinct honor and pleasure to serve as chair of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Uh, I welcome you to these lessons of lynching. And this was an opportunity driven by the staff of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission, particularly Chris Haley, to really use this time to introduce ourselves to you all. So yes, we are a public body. You're all welcome to our meetings, but we see this as an intimate opportunity to not just get to know uh, the commission and the work that we are charged to do, but to get a little taste of the people behind this extraordinary work. Again, I thank you on behalf of the commission for spending a little bit of time with us on this Wednesday evening. Quick shout out to my fellow commissioners. I saw Omar Eaton Martinez, Elizabeth Hughes, uh, Iris Barnes, and of course, um, many of the people that you will see this evening, my colleague, co-chair, vice chair, Charles Chavis, so forth, Nick Creary. There's so many to name. Just want to take a few minutes and just provide a little bit of background on Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Um, we are still in our infancy, but incredible things, even as we continue to uh, make ourselves known, not only in the state of Maryland, but throughout the United States and hopefully internationally as well. So one of the things that we know is when you hear Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you may be wondering, okay, well, what is that? Uh, in my tradition, we always give honor to those that allow us to be in this space. So it is important for us as a commission to give honor to the entities that help us to literally exist. So first, we'll start with the Equal Justice Initiative, based out of Montgomery, Alabama, started in 1989 by Brian Stevenson. If you haven't seen Just Mercy, watch Just Mercy. It was his opportunity to address some of the core issues when it came to racial injustice in the United States. For those of you who have seen the movie, you know some of the work that he has done. And one particular instance of that work is chronicling the extent to which racial terror lynchings occurred in the United States. So through the work of the Equal Justice Initiative, they were able to confirm over 4,000 racial terror lynchings in the United States, which at that time they were able to confirm 28 in the state of Maryland. Uh, that brings us to the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, which is a 501c3 that is charged with chronicling and memorializing the racial terror lynchings that happened in the state of Maryland. That was founded in 2018. So they work intimately with the Equal Justice Initiative, particularly on remembrance projects around the state of Maryland. Because of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Projects and many other champions, House Bill 307 was unanimously voted through the Maryland General Assembly, was signed into law by Governor Larry Hogan in 2019, and that created the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we are a state body whose charge is to chronicle and bring justice to the 40 plus confirmed racial terror lynchings that happened in the state of Maryland between 1854 and 1933. So hopefully that provides a little bit of further understanding and hopefully clarity between these three entities, which are separate entities, but do work intimately with the same goal in mind, to bring justice to what is a horrible aspect of the history of this country, but a necessary history for us to know, to remember, and to bring justice to. Next slide, please.
It's not working.
Oh, it's not working? Okay, there it is. So this is a map created by the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, which gives you a visual idea of where those confirmed racial terror lynchings took place. One of the things that you may immediately notice is something that kind of goes against maybe our typical narrative of the state of Maryland. When people think of something like a racial terror lynching, they may think, oh, that only happens in Western Maryland. You see only one happen in Western Maryland between Allegheny and perhaps Frederick County, so 4. And we may think of the Eastern Shore. So we see that, yes, there are several in Somerset, Worcester County, Wacomico, but hopefully what you notice is that the majority of the racial terror lynchings that happened in the state of Maryland was down the 95 corridor from Harford County, Baltimore County, Howard, Anne Arundel, Prince George's, and Montgomery County. So part of what we want people to know through the commission, through the Lynching Memorial Project, is that this happened everywhere in places that seem to run counter to something that horrible, something that devoid of humanity. It happened there too. So it shows how much history must be uncovered and how much history needs to be recognized, acknowledged, and learned from, most importantly. Next slide, please. So the proposed public hearings is one of the major charges of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because of the number of lynchings that have occurred, and certainly our charge to honor them all, we have decided that we aim to do public hearings in several regions around the state of Maryland. So as you see, some counties will be addressed on their own, such as Somerset County and Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, where the largest number of lynchings occurred. But we want to make sure that every county where every lynching occurred is accounted for. Most importantly, we want the people to come out to learn about the history of their state, perhaps the ugly history of their state, and to begin and continue the healing process. We know that something like a lynching, and if you have never seen a picture of a lynching, I actually do encourage you to look at it. I want you to understand the sheer brutality, the sheer sadism, the complete absence of humanity that is required to actually conduct a racial terror lynching or a lynching period. And to know that that happened many times in the state of Maryland, perhaps more than we actually know. But we know that something of that level of brutality leaves an imprint, obviously on the victims who cannot speak for themselves, but the families of the victims, those who watch it happen, and those who actually committed the act. And we know none of them are around to speak today, but we know that there are descendants out there. We know that there are towns and communities where these stories lie. And we want to make sure that everything is counted. We want to make sure we hear the total story, that everyone gets the opportunity to speak their truth and also to heal from these events. Racial terror lynchings are about preserving a dominant power. It's about intimidation. And that is what we aim to bring justice to, so that we don't repeat the sins of the past. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to my friend and colleague and fellow commissioner, Mr. Carl Snowden. Carl, take it away. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, David, and thank you for your leadership on one of the most important issues that I think the nation will have to deal with, which is the history of its original sin, which is racism and slavery. But before getting started, I want to formally thank Chris Haley, who has helped to put this together. We've got a very interesting panel. When the time comes, each of the panel members will be called upon. They will sort of introduce themselves for the first time to many people who are viewing this evening. I'm a native Annapolitan, a Marylander. I have served in many roles in Maryland. I was the first civil rights director for the Office of the Maryland Attorney General, where we dealt with issues dealing with racism. I've served in administrations of the former governor, Paris Glendening. I was a member of the county executive in Anne Arundel County cabinet, and I've been an elected official. And of all the issues that I have had to deal with over my public career, the issue of race and the issue of how we reach reconciliation continues to be a major, major issue, not only for myself, but for the entire nation, as people begin to address, how do we address the issues of the past? Well, one of the things that the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission recognizes is that in order to be able to deal with it, you've got to know the history, you've got to know what occurred. And as David had pointed out, there are many Marylanders who have no idea that lynching occurred in their city, their county, or indeed the state of Maryland. And so I wanted to kind of set the tone before we go into hearing from our esteemed panel who will have various views on this subject matter by sharing a story that's true and one that I would later learn about that occurred in my city, Annapolis, which is the capital of the state of Maryland. If you can take a moment and take a journey with me back in time. The year is 1906. It's December 21st. It's 4 days before Christmas. And if you ever visit Annapolis, you will know that we have a main street and it's brick. And if you can envision for a moment, people getting ready for the Christmas holiday. They're shopping, they are laughing, they are preparing for what is going to be a tremendous, wonderful celebration. The town is made up of African Americans and whites. It's a town that's been affected by its history. It's a segregated town. Black people know what part of the city they are supposed to be in. White people know what part of the city they are in. There are some unwritten rules as it relates to being an Annapolitan, being a Marylander. And everybody's complying with those rules of that day in 1906. While people are gathering for this shopping, the word is beginning to spread that there has been an assault. The assault has been on a white woman. And it's alleged that the white woman was assaulted by a black man, who the press would later describe as a brute. He is a black man who is about 6 feet, 1 inch tall. He walks with a limp and he has been apprehended by law enforcement. He is taken to a jail in a place called on Calvert Street in Annapolis, where the current Arundel Center exists. He's been secured, there are guards there, and the word is quickly spreading that this black man has been apprehended. Some Annapolitans decide that justice needed to be taken swiftly. Many believe that the white woman who's been assaulted should not have to face her accuser, should not have to go to trial, should not have to identify her assailant. They believe that this man who allegedly committed this crime of sexual assault should be dealt with swiftly and quickly. So about 50 of them gather. Some are wearing masks. Others have handkerchiefs over their face. And some have no disguise whatsoever. They're walking toward what is the jail, 50 strong. They're shouting and screaming. There are 2 deputies whose responsibility is to protect the man who is accused of committing this crime. The deputies, who are deputy sheriffs, recognize some people in the crowd, their neighbors, their friends. They put up some resistance, but not much. And this crowd, this mob, takes out this man. His name is Henry Davis. And Henry Davis is being taken by a mob. But a decision is made that Henry Davis needs to be literally taken through the black area where black people live. That black people need to know that when you assault a white woman, there is a price to be paid. So they deliberately take Henry Davis first to a church. It's called Asbury United Methodist Church. They watch as people look out of their windows. Then they march him from the church down to Calvert Street, where a large number of black people live. You hear black families telling their children to go inside as this man is marched through the street with this crowd. They're yelling and screaming. But they wanted to make sure that the neighbors, the Black neighbors, see what they're doing. There are no police who are responding. They're allowed to patrol, they're allowed to force him to walk through this Black community. They decided to take him to one of the oldest colleges in America. It's called St. John's College. They take him near the bluff at St. John's College, all along taunting him. They string him up to a tree. They decide it's time that he be taught a lesson, and the lesson is that he is to be lynched. So they get a rope, they put the rope around his neck as he struggles and begs that they do not take his life. They ignore it. The rope is put around his neck. He's lifted up by the rope, and they proceed to execute him by hanging. But there's a problem. The weight of Henry Davis is so great that he's not able, the branch that he has been tied to can't hold his body weight. So the branch breaks, and Henry Davis falls to the ground 3 or 4 feet from the tree. The mob noticed that Henry Davis is not dead. He is still alive. And the men who are gathered around him, who are screaming, shouting, they take out their guns and they shoot him. They shoot him some 100 times. His body is so mutilated by the bullets. Now he is dead. That they're assured of. And after they have killed him, after they have shot him, they decide to disperse. But there's no hurry to do it. There's no law enforcement. There's nobody coming to arrest them for this deed that they've done. So as the crowd disperses, Henry Davis is laying there. And a white man, an enterprising white man, decides to do something that would make him some money. He decides to photograph this mutilated body. It's a gruesome sight, but he photographs it. He would later sell those photos as souvenirs, as postcards, which would be sold for 3 cents to those who would be interested in seeing the body of Henry Davis. What happens next is remarkable. For 3 to 4 hours, Henry Davis lies there, body exposed to elements. Nobody touches the body. Members of the Black community are too frightened to even go and reclaim the body. A decision is finally made that the body should be removed. They contact the only Black mortician that exists at that time in Annapolis. His job is to go and claim the body. And he does. The decision is made by the powers to be that there will be no funeral, there will be no church services, there will be no grave marker. So they take him to a place called Brewer Hill Cemetery. They bury him in an unmarked grave. December 21st, 1906, 4 days before Christmas. The next day, December 22nd, the Capital newspaper, then called the Evening Capital, does an editorial, and they talk about the fact that this Negro, this brute, this man had been lynched. They said that this lynching has given Anne Arundel County a black eye. They don't argue that he should not have been lynched. In fact, reports suggest that they thought he was guilty of the crime. It's what happens afterwards. After December 22nd, Christmas is allowed to go on, and no one writes anything about Henry Davis or this lynching. In April of 2007, the then state's attorney has impaneled a grand jury. The grand jury takes secret testimony, and a decision is issued. And the decision that's issued is that the grand jury could find no witnesses who actually witnessed the murder of Henry Davis, although there were more than 50 people present. They conclude that Henry Davis was the victim of a homicide, but there is no one who will be indicted, charged, or convicted for it. And in April of 2007, the case is formally closed, and Annapolitans soon forget about Henry Davis. There's no textbooks. If you happen to matriculate through Anne Arundel County Public Schools, you will find no reference to the lynching of Henry Davis. No one will discuss Henry Davis. In fact, he will be forgotten until almost 80 years later, when a man named John Snowden has been executed, who was executed in 1919, and some people began to look at what happened in the John Snowden case, and they come across some documents about Henry Davis. And for the first time, Annapolitans learned in greater numbers that Henry Davis was lynched. The then mayor of Annapolis, a woman named Ellen Moyer, and a group of council members and the NAACP decide on that, with that information, that there should be a proper burial for Henry Davis. So on the 95th anniversary of his death, there is a ceremony held at Brewer Hill Cemetery. As I stated earlier, no one knew where Henry Davis was buried. So what was done was there was a plaque created. There was a ceremony held, and the minister, a woman named Reverend Mamie Williams, who was a district superintendent for Asbury United Methodist Church, the church that Henry Davis was originally taken to, performed a religious service there on the site. And Henry Davis is given a formal burial. No one says anything following that burial. And the world may have never heard of Henry Davis. And I tell this story as we get ready to hear from an esteemed panel, to let people know the importance of knowing this history, to holding people accountable, to seeing what lessons we can learn from history. Henry Davis allowed to have his body laid exposed for a number of hours. In 2014, a man named Michael Brown in a place called Ferguson, Missouri, he too would have his body exposed for hours. Is there a correlation between the lynchings of the past and the injustice of the present? The panel members that we have will have this discussion. People who are watching will have an opportunity when the panel is done to be able to be part of a discussion, to be able to ask questions. We have someone monitoring the the chat room as we proceed. And if you have a question, please use the chat room to have your question raised. We will then ask the question of the panelists. We have, as I indicated, 4 distinguished panel members. I will have each of them introduce themselves, and we will proceed with what I hope to be an enlightening discussion on lynchings, the lessons and the history of lynching, and where do we go from here. So I'll turn it back to our chair, David, who is one of the panel members. David?
Thank you, Carl. That was an incredible story, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to share it with everyone here. Stories are very important to me. One of the first things that I tell people about me is that I'm a storyteller. I have plenty of other titles, associate faculty in mental health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, adjunct faculty at the University of Florida Center for Arts and Medicine, executive director of Woundwork Productions. The list goes on and on and on. But the most important one for this time is storytelling. And I think of a story, and I won't go into all the details of the story, but it's the story of an eagle that thought it was a chicken. It was saved by a farmer, brought back to his farm, and placed with the only birds that were there, which were chickens. So this eagle grew up like a chicken, did everything that chickens do. It wasn't until there was a naturalist that heard the stories that took the time and the effort and the energy to show that eagle what it truly was. I had the chance to tell that story earlier today with some high school students at Washington International School in DC. And the point that I wanted to make through that story was that what we are seeing in 2020 and what we saw between 1854 and 1933 are examples that reinforce this notion that people aren't what they feel they are. So something like a racial terror lynching was done to intimidate and to remind Black people and people of color their place in the system of white power. And I stress white power, not white supremacy, because it is a system. But let me start my story with the institution that I represent on the Maryland Lynching, Truth, and Reconciliation Commission, and that is the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum, located at 1601 East North Avenue in Baltimore, Maryland. That is my hometown. That is where I was born. That is where I was raised. That is where I live. And that is probably where I will die. And that is by choice. And it's on this 1600 block of East North Avenue that I've had the lifelong opportunity to learn about who I am as a person of the African diaspora. I am grateful of my ancestry. I am the son of a Nigerian immigrant. I say that proudly. And I also had the chance to know all of what Blackness entailed through the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum. It was through that museum that I became a storyteller. It was through that museum that I became an African drummer. It was also through that museum where I first learned about racial terror lynchings. I can still remember the day I went down into the lynching exhibit at the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum before it opened to the public. I can still remember the Yolanda Adams song playing in the background as people were getting things together for this opening. And I went down into the lynching exhibit and saw it for the first time and saw how the depiction of those heinous crimes, those crimes against humanity, were so vivid. And the one that sticks out the most was the lynching of Hayes and Mary Turner. I'll do my best to honor the story. Hayes Turner, this was in Georgia around 1918, I believe, 18 or 19. And Hayes Turner was among many men who was falsely accused of killing a white landowner. And this was a white landowner who was particularly known for his brutality against his Black employees. And so he was killed. Never found out who actually did it, but Hayes Turner was lynched as part of the accused, or at least bringing justice to the death of this white landowner. His wife who was pregnant for 7 months, Mary Turner, called out the killers of her husband, something that was, unfortunately for her, a death sentence. because literally the day after she did that, which was the day after her husband was lynched, she too was lynched. She was set on fire. She was hung from a tree. She was mutilated, including her child being cut out of her womb. That child dropped to the ground and gave two feeble cries and was met with a boot to silence those cries. And they used an empty liquor bottle as the marker of their graves. I was introduced to that at 14 years old. You can imagine what that would do to a 14-year-old black boy, to know that someone's would be capable of doing that simply because of this. And that stuck with me. And I'm grateful that I had this time to process that trauma and that pain, because it prepared me for what I'm doing now, which started in 2019 when my godmother, who was a co-founder of the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, Dr. Joanne Martin, along with the late Dr. Elmer Martin, peace be upon him, my godfather, she asked me if I would be willing to represent the museum as a part of this commission. And I said, absolutely. I never say no to my godmother. I am eternally grateful to her for where I am. The fact that I knew PhDs could be black from the very beginning of my life. So it's no surprise that I was capable of earning a PhD from the best public health school in the world, as they'll tell you. So I remember that first day that the commission got together, and it became time for us to elect or choose an interim chair. And I tell you all, just like I tell everybody else, I was the only one that raised my hand. It didn't take long for me to realize the importance of that choice. And Zanita, I thank you. I know you're on here. I thank you for egging me on to do it, because it made so much sense that in 2019, we had a state body long overdue, and we know this, charged to chronicle the histories and bring justice to racial terror lynchings. And it was led and is being led by a young black man, the typical victim of a racial terror lynching, not just in Maryland, but the entire United States. So it is an honor and a distinction that I say proudly and want to bring so much honor to it. So why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Because these are the aspects of our state's history and the history of this country that need to be told. 2020 has been a year of revelation. And yes, I mean to sound biblical. This is a year of revelation for a lot of people. For they finally realized so many of the truths that have existed in this country for so long, but they had the pleasure of ignoring it. 2020 said you no longer have that luxury of ignoring these truths anymore. And when you see a life taken, any life, but especially a black life, taken over 8 minutes and 46 seconds, when there was no doubt the heinousness, the brutality, the sheer disregard of life that happened over those 8 minutes and 46 seconds, it shakes you to your core. And because of the stillness of this year being brought to a halt because of a global pandemic, this country and the entire world had to see the brutality for all that it entailed over 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That, ladies and gentlemen, was a lynching. So people all over the world got to see a lynching for the first time. And because many of us are still in touch with our humanity, it rocked them to their core, as it should have always done. So as much as it's about honoring the past and bringing justice to the victims of racial terror lynchings, with the last being nearly 100 years ago, it is about bridging the connection to the lynchings that occur today. When you think about what typically happens in a lynching, the body is completely disregarded. Think about the story that Commissioner Snowden told. The time to linger, for people to see it, to process it, to internalize it. as it withered and died and rotted. No respect, no appreciation, no love for that human being whose life was taken because of this. Has it changed? Absolutely. Has it ended? It never did. So that is why it is so important for us to do this work. It is grueling work, and we are grateful to all of those who have done this work years before this commission came to be. One of the things that I stress is we are not going to recreate the wheel. We are going to build upon the extraordinary work that EJI has done, that the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project has done, that local coalitions around the state of Maryland have done to bring honor, to bring awareness, to bring acknowledgement of these crimes against humanity. And all the commission wants to do is take it to the next level, to make sure that every Marylander knows the history of this state, the ugly side of this state's history, reflection of the ugly side of this country's history. But most importantly, to make sure that we don't do it again. I'm sure I speak for many of you who are sick and tired of being sick and tired. I know I am. I would much rather be doing something else. But this is the charge that has been put upon me, and I will do it to the best of my abilities. I know I speak for all of my fellow commissioners, and I speak for the staff of this commission to say we will do our due diligence to make sure that this story is honored and remembered and memorialized, and that we take those important steps to bring justice, healing, and justice to this series of crimes against humanity. It's the healing and the justice that brings the reconciliation. The truth plus the healing that is necessary, plus the justice that we will bring, will equal the reconciliation that is at the hallmark, at the core, that is in the DNA of what this commission is all about. So I thank you all for being on this journey with us. We are not alone. We never wanted to be alone. Please help us. Help us to do right by the victims of these heinous crimes. Help us to do right by the history of this state and the history of this country. Help us to make sure that this state and this country exudes the values and the virtues that it claims to exude for every single person. Because no matter the color of your skin, no matter your origin, no matter who you love, no matter to whom you pray, whether you pray at all, let's make sure that we all get the justice, the freedom, the liberation, the love. The love. I know I'm sounding gushy right now. The love that is necessary for life to be great. Thank you.